Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. We are thrilled to talk today to a new literacy friend. We cannot wait to hear everything she has to say about, about knowledge, about oral reading, about oral language, and all the things knowledge building. Melissa, I know you're really excited too.
Yeah, so today we have Sonia Cabell, and we're really excited to have her. I'm really excited because, I feel like I'm seeing more and more this idea of science of reading and people saying it's just the phonics, it's just the decoding, it's just word recognition. And I love that Sonia is doing research right now about the other side of the reading rope, about the language comprehension. And she's going to tell us all about it today. So welcome, Sonia.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We're so glad that you said yes to podcasting with us. We are thrilled to talk with you because we could talk knowledge building all day. So
yes. And I'm so excited to be here. And I love the kind of back and forth you have with your guests. So I'm excited to be a part of that.
Oh, cool. Well, thanks. Would you mind starting us off with just a little bit about yourself? We know you
Absolutely.
have a really interesting story, I think, anyway. Anyone who is a second grade teacher is automatically has a great story.
Aw, thank you. Thank you. Well, currently I'm an associate professor. I'm sorry. I just demoted myself. I'm an associate professor at Florida State University in the School of Teacher Education and in the Florida Center for Reading Research. And my work focuses on studying the prevention of reading difficulties and really about how children develop and how we can help them develop strong language skills, strong language comprehension early on. And my work also focuses on integrating developing those language skills through content instruction as well. So I did start as a second grade teacher in Oklahoma. And I then became a reading coach during the Reading First era. So I was a Reading First coach in both Oklahoma and in Virginia. And I love the primary grades. In fact, my hat's off. I think one of you is a middle school teacher. Melissa, are you?
Yeah, that was
Melissa.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. My hat's off to anybody who can teach third grade and up, and especially middle school. To me, middle school is the scariest time of my personal life. I really focus on the younger grades and the primary grades and really about laying a foundation for later literacy learning. And then when I was in Virginia, I found out about the doctoral program actually through a book I would use in the classroom. I used Words Their Way at the time in the classroom written, and Marcia Invernizzi was one of the authors. And so I met with her at University of Virginia and I learned what a PhD program was all about. And I had no idea. I thought to myself, in order to do a PhD, you had to first be like a principal. And I'm like, I'm never going to be a principal of a school. So maybe I'm never going to get my PhD. So that's not true for anybody out there who might think that you first have to be a principal to get your PhD. That is not true at all. So I studied reading education there at the University of Virginia.
That's so cool. So you just jumped right into that program.
I did. I had my master's in reading education. I was always really interested in reading because I think reading and teaching kids to read lays a foundation for everything. When I was a second grade teacher, reading was always one of the critically most important things to teach. And there was a particular child that still sticks in my mind who I couldn't help. And she wasn't able to retain the learning. And she was in second grade and she really couldn't read at all, couldn't decode any words. And unfortunately, I would use practices that are not scientifically based, that we know now are not scientifically based, like drilling with flashcards and things like this.
Yeah.
And she didn't retain any of that. And I was wondering, like, what do we do with her? And so I feel like that is one person who has stuck with me that makes me think about, that made me kind of think about wanting to get my master's and wanting to get my PhD in reading education, and how can we help students learn to read. And then when I got into my doctoral program, I really began to be interested through Laura Justice's work. Dr. Laura Justice is now at The Ohio State University, and she's an early childhood researcher. And she, through working with her during my doctoral program and learning from her, I became interested in the prevention of reading difficulties and intervening in preschool, and particularly how important language and developing oral language skills are to all aspects of reading, and particularly to language comprehension.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next is I pulled out a quote from, I forget exactly which article that you sent us it was in, but it said, "The knowledge that we bring to a text is the key determinant in how much we understand that text." And I was just like thinking, like, how did you get from you're in grad school to you're interested in helping students learn how to read to like that focus on knowledge?
That's a really good question. And it's quite a story, actually. I do want to say, though, that I can't take credit for that wonderful quote. I believe it's like Anderson and Pearson.
I think
right, yeah, which is good. And I actually wrote it down. And I thought Melissa read my mind when I was looking at our show notes here. I was like, how did you know that was the quote I highlighted too? She's like, I didn't.
So, it's the quote I highlight too. And a lot of researchers highlight because it's, and in researchers, we only like quote things that are really well said in a way that you can't say another way.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know whether I directly quoted them there, but really that is I attribute that to them.
Yeah.
But how did how I became interested in content knowledge really has to do with more of my preschool research background. So in my work about that I was involved in with Laura Justice during grad school and then after grad school, so we're talking about the mid to late 2000s, we were doing studies that where we would help teachers to be conversationally responsive partners with children. The language learning, and there was research showing that language learning environments were not optimal for young children, and particularly young children living in poverty. In school settings. And so we were thinking, well, how can we help teachers learn how to help children develop their language? And the kind of language I was interested in was the language of books, the language of text, what some people call academic language. We as we're growing up, we're learning spoken language just by our conversations with more able speaking partners, and we learn language naturally. However, there are aspects of language that are still language. So I don't think it's something totally, academic language is something totally different. But the way we speak, we use words that are much more common, much less complicated, much less complex. But in written language, even in a simple book that we might read to preschoolers, there's many more instances of what rare words, which are words that only appear a certain number of times, usually at something that a fourth grader or above would know. Mm-hmm. There are the syntax, when we read something, the syntax is totally different in written language than in how I would speak it right now. Mm-hmm. So if young children aren't being exposed to written language through read-alouds, where are they getting the exposure to those rare words? Where are they getting exposure to that complex syntax? Because the conversations by themselves aren't doing it.
Right.
Now, in training teachers to be conversationally responsive partners, we were doing that work. And what we found was similar to what other researchers were finding, that we were able to help teachers have more conversations with children, and children were talking more, and there were more back and forths, and maybe teachers were even asking more open-ended questions. However, teachers were not necessarily having conversations that would expand children's thinking or expand the discussion to build on children's ideas through these techniques of just training people how to, teaching people how to have better conversations. And, it was really inspired for me by the content area interest was really inspired by a couple of things. And one of them was I was at a conference where I was presenting findings from these conversational responsive studies that were mixed in that we were able to do things that showed some impact on students' language, but not the impact on the standardized language measures that you're hoping to see, the more general language measures like standardized vocabulary or syntax. And there were other people who were presenting at the same conference, research conference, that were saying similar things. And the great Catherine Snow of Harvard University was our discussant. I don't know if she remembers saying this. I don't even know if she remembers me. But she said something that stuck with me, and that was maybe we need to give teachers and children something to talk about. Coupled with that, a couple years later, I did a study where I looked at preschool teachers and the language modeling that they were doing in different contexts, during book reading, during science, during social studies, during all of these different activity areas, and found that when teachers were doing science, when they were teaching science, and book reading was a close one was in the mix too here, they were using language strategies more naturally to both to do things like asking open-ended questions, engaging children in those rich conversations as back and forth conversations, building their conceptual understanding by, building on what they're saying. So it was more than just talk. It was the integration of, I saw it as, there's something special going on here that maybe we can build on, where teachers are already naturally doing some of the things that we're hoping for them to do.
Can I ask a question that might be a silly question?
There are no silly questions.
When they're not talking about the content, right? And I have an idea in my head of what the conversation might be like that. But I'm curious from your perspective, can you describe a before? Because I think I have a good idea of the after, of the content-rich conversation or the content-rich open-ended questions. Mm-hmm. What did it look like before? What was that like?
So let me try to answer in a couple of ways. So let's go before first. Before would be, let's say, teachers asking a lot of closed-ended questions.
Okay.
I would say that this happens all the time still. So, a teacher, we had a scenario where we had teachers in our PD sessions where we had teachers playing with Play-Doh. These were preschool teachers. And we said, let's imagine you're playing with Play-Doh and here's a child, and they role played. The number one go-to question.
What is your favorite color of Play-Doh?
What color is it? Not even what is your favorite color? Both of which are closed-ended questions because they require only a one-word response to be adequate. But what color is it? And we had already done all of this discussion and training about how do you change those closed-ended questions to open-ended questions? What are you making? What are you doing? How does this feel? Or whatever, versus, so in a lot of times too, researchers, Anne-Marie Heinemann and Barbara Wasik from Temple University have highlighted that sometimes teachers will also ask an open-ended question, but immediately follow it up with a closed-ended question. They'll ask a question, but not stop and wait. So is that helpful to they're immediately assuming kids can't answer it. So need some sort of scaffold there before even waiting.
Okay. That's helpful for that's step one. Okay, we're trying to shift from just the close to now a little bit more open, but It seems like there's like 3 phases here. That was like the phase 1, close-ended questions. Phase 2, now we're going to get to open-ended questions, but may not have some things to talk about. And then phase 3 is like the content-rich conversation. Am I,
Lori? I think that's a really
capturing
smart way of capturing it. Maybe you should write about it. Maybe we could write about it.
No, you're so much better than me. You do it.
So I think what you're saying, like that, the open-ended questions, what that does is it helps the conversation move back and forth. It is actually setting you up then for those language enriching strategies. Okay. So you have those open-ended questions, but it's not just stopping there, right? That allows the conversation to occur rather than I say something, you have a response, and I say, good job. Right. And I move on to the next topic. So there is this idea of asking open-ended questions and then extending what kids are saying, listening to what children are saying, extending their ideas. And you could do this by adding information or adding an idea to something they said to make it more complete, or probing back to them, asking them a follow-up question, building on it. So not just letting it be like, I ask an open-ended question, you respond, good job. Because that's a conversation stopper. You want to engage children's, the content helps engage the mind, give something to discuss that's worthy of discussion, that's worthy of curiosity, it's worthy of attention. And so I would say not all conversations are exactly the same. And I would say that the data, I think we do need more from a research perspective. We do need more data on the conversations in content-rich classrooms, which is something I'm interested in kind of digging deeper into in the primary grades.
Well, we can't wait to read that research.
I know. I'm currently writing curriculum, and I'm like furiously taking notes here. Like,
nice.
check the questions you ask.
Yes, and and also like the level of question, right? Some things are literally right there, literal, and then inferential. It's that inferential thinking that we want to move students toward, to really think and read between the lines and understand more deeply and engage. And what better way of engaging than integrating with things that they care about, are interested in? Yeah. And content just provides a very good basis for it. And unfortunately, in the early grades, it's been given a short shrift in terms of time. And I know that, P. David Pearson likes to say that it's the reading became the bully. And that's, I think there's a lot of truth to that in the early 2000s, the focus became on reading, and the length of instructional time given to reading was so much that there wasn't, in the early grades, that there wasn't a lot of time for content area teaching. And those things have been historically in our system separated. So we have like a ELA textbook adoption, and then we have other textbook adoptions, right? So, or teachers might say, we only teach science every other day or half the year, and social studies half the year. I've heard that in kindergarten. I've heard that, some people are also substituting their content area with the content-rich English language arts programs, which isn't what a lot of those programs were designed for. There's a lot of great things about those programs, but it isn't what they were necessarily designed for. But so that we do have an issue that's broader than like I don't think teachers should feel guilty. It's much broader than the teacher and school even. And it's a larger issue that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All of those things do happen. Yeah. So I'm wondering like where this is happening well. Like are there, and what does this look like when it's happening well? And like how can we help have an impact and support teachers to have this happen well for them, or have them learn what does content-rich conversation look like? And I'm even curious, like down the road, not this moment, but how this translates to writing. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Writing is another true love. Writing is another true love of mine. Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And I think that it probably happens well in a lot of places. And that there are, let me just describe, how about let me just talk a little bit about what it might look like. And one key piece, so there's been a lot of research on book reading aloud to children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of benefits of reading aloud to children. So we talked about some of them, that books contain more rare words than they're more complex texts. A lot of the things we read aloud to children are usually a couple of grade levels above from when they can read that on their own. So they're exposed to different types of texts, different genres. Because even in content-rich learning, could be a variety of genres, both fiction, informational, narrative, but not just the book itself. There's a lot of research around the extratextual talk, the talk that happens outside of the exact words that are read. And that has been studied in the vocabulary instruction that goes on during the reading of the text, the conversations that might go on during and after, what happens before. So there are these pieces that of these content-rich approaches, and read aloud is a big vehicle that is being used in integrating content and literacy in the early grades, because that content that approach of content and literacy integration really happens with content and oral language in the early grades, especially. It's not necessarily always happening with the texts that students are able to read themselves, although some programs try to build knowledge through the text that students are reading themselves in the early grades too. But most, I would say, in the early grades, K2, are doing it through read alouds. And so the research base on read alouds is pretty rich. That read aloud is a context in which conversations can occur that can enrich students' language skills, and it provides a vehicle for delivering some of that content. But it's also important to note that the goal isn't like getting through the book, right? Because some of the books, like some content, books that the authors aren't writing them, so they're not thinking about your read aloud when they write these things. I don't think. And so it is perfectly okay to read part of a text, and then read the rest of it later, or to even clip pages in the text that could be skipped over in order to maintain the whole story. So I've done both of those kinds of things in instruction. Curriculum makers now are developing or working with books that they or texts that can be done in a lesson, or will purposefully span over multiple lessons or be revisited. So that makes the job easier.
So much better about reading aloud to my 3-year-old, because I do just that sometimes.
Right.
Because even like the Dr. Seuss books, they're pretty long for a 3-year-old. And I just shorten it up a little.
I think about it. Right. So it's not that every word in the book. So I think sometimes parents and teachers are get worried about, I have to cover every word in the book. And so stopping kids from talking and things like that. Mm-hmm. But research on book reading has shown that those active conversations with children, in fact, a big area of research on this has been in preschool and dialogic reading. And that's something that was developed by Russ Whitehurst and my colleagues here at FCRR, Chris Lonigan and Beth Phillips has also been involved in curricula that use dialogic reading. And there's a lot of good evidence for the goal of that. One of the goals is to engage children in conversations, and they become the storyteller. And it's important. So I think sometimes in our thinking, at least in my thinking as a teacher, I wouldn't prioritize as much as I needed to the contribution that students make to the shared, the read aloud experience. Mm-hmm. Because what you don't want happening is you don't want a child to be spacing out during the read aloud. I think my 7-year-old is doing that right now in school. I just met with a teacher yesterday, and I'm like, I know that he could answer these simple questions about the story.
He's just zoning out. Yeah.
Right. And so, you don't want to you want to make sure kids are tracking with you. I'm not faulting the
Yeah.
teacher. We have a wonderful teacher. But it's just a personal reminder that it's the kids who we're trying to teach here,
Right.
not the material we're trying to cover.
Yeah. Which I think in the moment sometimes gets lost, right? You're like,
It's easy to
there's
get
a lot
lost.
of pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
You
As a
write your
teacher,
great lesson
completely,
plan and you want to make sure you do it well.
Right. And you have the goal of ending it, right? You have the
Right.
goal of ending it. So I think it's, and I do think that research also has focused on what the teacher is doing. And I think that more research needs to focus on what the children's contributions. But the difficulty about that, unfortunately, from a research perspective is, I think one of the reasons why the book reading literature and research hasn't, the read aloud literature hasn't really focused on the interactions or the student, what students are bringing to the table. It's because when you videotape book readings, unless you have special mic'd, and even when you have really great miking, you can't really capture what all the children are saying very clearly sometimes. Without being really intrusive. So it makes a really difficult circumstance as a researcher.
Yeah. Turn and talk, and then there's 30 kids turning and talking.
Right.
And you're trying
Yeah.
to see what they're all saying.
And turn and talk, I really like that method, to get all the students engaged about the text.
I like anything where like kids are actively engaged as much as possible. And it's like, that's what the turn and talk represents for me, is that the students, it's not like a teacher-student interaction, right? It's like every student is sharing their thoughts with each other in response. And then then the teacher can take a couple suggestions versus the teacher choosing one child. And then that one child has the experience of learning, but the other, 29 say might not have to, they don't really have to think. They can just listen. So I love any experience that gets every student involved as much as possible in that learning experience. So,
and it doesn't have to be necessarily whole group. It can be a small group read aloud. There could be different structures that you're using to achieve those, rich interactions that you're looking for. So that the content-rich approaches seem to feature coherent text sets through read-alouds in the earlier grades. So these coherent text sets where knowledge is being built, and in the research base, and a lot of the research base consists of not programs that are available for to be used publicly, but researcher-developed programs or interventions that they developed, that some of them are available publicly, but most of the extant studies in kindergarten through fifth grade that are either experiments or quasi-experiments, and experiments and quasi-experiments they feature a treatment group and some sort of comparison group. In a true experiment, those groups are randomly assigned to that condition. And in a quasi-experiment, they're not randomly assigned. So that's just the difference between experiments and quasi-experiments. But when my colleague, Heijin Huang, who's at the University of Minnesota, and I, along with our colleague Rachel Joyner, looked at all the studies that were available in the K through 5 space that integrated content and literacy to some degree and had vocabulary and comprehension outcomes. And what we found, there was 35 of them. So it's not a huge amount. And in K2, there was like just a small handful of them. And what we found was that that integration versus like siloed traditional approaches, what we found is that those integrated approaches mattered for children's vocabulary and comprehension, particularly on measures developed by the researchers, or the more proximal measures, what I call more proximal, meaning kids learn the words that they're taught, they learn the knowledge that they're taught, they learn, they learn reading a passage that's closely related to what was taught. But then it also had generalized effects on comprehension. I think this is still a growing area of research, but one that merits, warrants some attention. And I think it's a pretty hot topic in the US right now, this integrating content and literacy. And the way that people are doing it in the United States right now, it seems like districts are doing it is through what I call content-rich English language arts instruction, where the content is being pulled into English language arts.
I was going to ask you to clarify that, because I think as secondary teachers too, we also would talk about bringing literacy into the content area.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when I talk about integrated approaches, and integrating content and literacy, I'm talking about any time of the day. So a content literacy approach, like you mentioned, Melissa, where you're doing content across, you're bringing literacy into all the content areas, right? And in secondary, that has been an approach that has long been kind of espoused, I would say more in the older grades than in the very youngest grades. Namely because the very youngest grades often don't have much content instruction. Right. Whereas, so I think that's true. And so we looked across both of those, and there is really great research on that integration in the older grades. When I'm talking about content-rich English language arts instruction, I'm specifically talking about when content becomes a driving force in English language arts. That doesn't mean that these content-rich English language arts approaches are designed to meet all the content standards. They're still designed to meet the ELA standards. But I would say most of the curricula that I'm familiar with that are being widely used, I don't know that they meet all of the content standards.
Yeah, because I don't think that's the intention.
That's right. I agree with you. I think that the curricula aren't designed to be used exclusively, and then you don't have to teach content, right? It's designed to, so you still need across the day something coherent that is going on across the day, where the content is speaking to the ELA instruction and vice versa. But what I have found in practice is that a lot of times schools will make the decision to replace content teaching with one of the content-rich English language arts curricula. And I think that is a mistake, because the designers of those curricula themselves would not say to do that. Right. So I know that for a fact, for like core knowledge language arts, I studied this program. I'm not a developer of the program. This is a program that I did 2 randomized control trials on, and in kindergarten. And the developers would not say to not teach, the content area. It's not supposed to be a standalone. But I think that there's such little content teaching going on that it gives some content where there maybe was much less before.
Okay, so I want to dive deeper into that, but first, I'm wondering if you could clarify or explain what could this look like for, like, if I were a student, could you walk me through the day? Like, what could this look like in a student's day? Like a day in the life of a student who, just so we can all ground ourselves in, I'm a first or second grade student, and you, maybe kindergarten, you choose, you're the expert in the primary. And I walk into school, I have, a rough glance. I have ELA, I have math, and then I have lunch and recess. And then I'm going on to the end of my day, and this is just my daughter's schedule. And then I have science or social studies or health or one of those things. And then I go, like, what would optimally happen in each, like, if you could build an optimal day, what would that look like to be content rich?
Wow, that's okay. So let me just talk.
That's your next book.
I would say that we have some really great minds working on this in this space already too. So Nell Duke at the University of Michigan has been developing curricula that cut across the entire day, that is interdisciplinary and integrative, and takes into account all these different areas. And I sit on the advisory board for that, and have been able to see what a feat it is, because what you really need to have is people who are experts in all of these areas talking to one another, because you can't just have a reading person guiding the whole day. Right. So I don't know.
That's what I was thinking,
Right?
like when I taught fifth grade, and I remember being like, okay, I don't actually know what's happening like in that classroom over there, unless my co-teacher told me, but it was, the kids were traveling and experiencing things throughout the day. So I only knew the sliver of what they were experiencing.
Yes. So it's tough because people, the researchers or people doing the research need to talk to each other. People teaching need to talk to each other. The leaders, administration, there needs to be a lot more collaboration going on in understanding. And you're at the school levels, what you're talking about is like, even teachers might not know what's going on in other parts of the day for their student. So I can't say that I know the solution to that, but in a content-rich English language arts instruction, what makes it distinct from traditional instruction is, the children are, instruction is designed around topics and not around themes. So a theme might be like our community, or what can animals teach us, or something like this. And then there might be many things you do during the week around this. I would say traditional kind of core reading programs are structured with themes, which is not, I'm not saying anything that's bad necessarily. I'm just saying that that's not necessarily content rich. It's not like the content is the driver there, where you have these content rich English language arts approaches that are now very popular, that drive with the content. So they drive with a set of topics, like you might learn about farms and plants, and so that topic becomes there's some common features that in the research based approaches that are there, among others, the ones that have been showing some effects, and there's some common features in those, and one of them is that content is driven, is a driver. So topics, rather than while all the English language arts standards are covered, the topic becomes really important. The use of coherent text sets with often the interactive read alouds incorporated, discussion and writing that is connected to the topic. So not discussion and writing for the sake of discussion and writing, or for only like, I have an inferential question here, and I have right, or this is an open-ended question. This is but rather, how are we building that knowledge, and how is the writing related to building that knowledge? And then the last feature is vocabulary. The vocabulary that's being taught. They're also, while general purpose words, which a lot of people think about as tier 2 words, are being taught, there's also the more content specific words that are being taught, and they're being taught in relationship with one another. So through the texts that are read, through the vocabulary, the deepening of the vocabulary, you see that in these approaches. And then you see that also then play out in the widely used curricula, content-rich ELA curricula, that makes it distinct from the traditional curricula.
Yeah. So just to kind of like put a pin on that, like if I'm a student, I walk in, I experience that, high quality experience in ELA that's content-rich,
right,
everything that you just explained, then I would go on with my day, but I would still be receiving instruction in science and social studies. And I think that that's where it gets confusing, because the topics sometimes in ELA, right, or oftentimes in the content rich are science related or history related. So it is difficult to kind of like parse out for teachers to say like, well, we didn't already teach science, or we didn't already teach social studies. We taught topics related to those in ELA, but it's also still important that students are, experiencing the science curriculum where they're doing experiments and they're learning the scientific processes that they're, not learning in ELA. I just want to make sure that we stamp that, and that's an accurate way for me to describe that. And if not, please correct me.
Yes, I think that is a what you're describing, I think is a very valid concern, is that, and that I would say that my, probably my science education colleagues, professors would have this concern of, you can't, science is inquiry based. There are, and in fact, one of my colleagues is like, she would never start with a read aloud. She would start with some sort of hands-on activity, then move into a read aloud. So I think that reading shouldn't take over science and social studies, but rather provide a supplement. So it could be that certain topics are first covered in science and social studies, and then they appear in English language arts, or maybe you're able to sync your whole curriculum at the same time, where you're covering the same topic and as you're going. I think it's difficult, and this is why I think we need solutions, more solutions that think about the relationship between those two. Mm-hmm. I think the Core Knowledge Foundation has thought through sets of both of those areas. And I don't know about the other large publishers, but they probably also have science and social studies pieces that they sell separately, that would probably go along with their English language arts, but meet the science standards, right? For sure. And provide children with the hands-on experiences that they need to really engage in inquiry and the disciplines of this, science and social studies disciplines, and it not be all about book reading.
Yeah, I would imagine too, this would be really helpful in the primary grades when you are teaching the whole day, like as a teacher, just planning for the day. Because I'm thinking as a secondary teacher, like if we are building knowledge for the, a whole module on the Civil War, but I know they're, they actually learned about that last year. Okay, that's fine though, but they can bring all that knowledge they brought from social studies to my class when we're reading about the Civil War in my ELA class. Right. But in the primary grades, I would imagine, like, when you're planning for the whole day, that might get a lot trickier. And it might just feel better to, when you talk about like Nell Duke's, what does a full integrated day look like? It might just be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's no easy answers, but Melissa, you're bringing up a really important point. And that is that teachers need to kind of be aware what children have already learned in what various grades, even if it's the grades before them, not just early in the year, so they can then activate that background knowledge as you're starting to learn new knowledge. So you can integrate your prior learning with your new knowledge. And that importance of the, for many, many years, we harped on the importance of activating background knowledge. And now kind of the focus is on building background knowledge, because what if there is no knowledge to activate? But as students are having content-rich kinds of curricula, there's more of an opportunity for teachers to make sure that they know what is the sequence of when it was taught, so they can activate that prior learning. Yeah.
You know what that makes me think of is when I was a teacher, I remember having students do like this. Whenever anybody talks about this vivid memory stands out to me. I remember having students do a KWL, right? Mm-hmm. What you know, what you think you know, what you learned. And all of when I was walking around, I was looking at what they know. I remember thinking, a lot of the things they know or they think they know are not accurate. These are misconceptions. Exactly. So I was like, I almost wondered, like, was it harming them or hurting them to write down? And like, as you write, you're kind of stamping, right? Something in your brain. Yeah. To write what they think they knew that was totally wrong.
But it was also helpful for you as a teacher.
It was very helpful for me. I know. I remember vividly thinking like, oh my gosh, they don't really know. They have such inaccurate knowledge right now. And how am I going to, get them accurate knowledge so that they can access what they need to know?
Yeah. So I think it's in the revisiting of those inaccuracies, because ignoring those, and, I agree with you that you don't want to just put a stamp on it and say, yeah, that's great. The
Right.
sun does rise in the west or whatever.
Right.
But you want to, you might have a time when they can share what they think that they know. And then you revisit some of those things and say, okay, does the sun rise in the west? Am I right? Hold on. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So, I got to background check myself. So you don't want to just leave those hanging when you know that there are
Right.
inaccuracies.
Right.
Sometimes also teachers, though, feel that they don't have enough knowledge to teach themselves accurately. And I think that's a really valid concern. And I think that that's what some of these curricula are trying to help offer teachers is enough knowledge or ways to also gain some of that knowledge to be able to teach the content more accurately. Because, it's not that traditional English language arts instruction is devoid of content. It's just that the content skips around a lot. So
Right.
it
doesn't go very
privileges.
deep.
Yeah, so it privileges children who have the background knowledge already and that can uptake the new things that are being learned rather than sticking on a topic and building that prior knowledge in order to be able to uptake the next topic as well.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a really good point
Yeah.
to bring up, though, about the teachers, though. And I think it's good for us to just say it that, some of these topics are pretty in depth. And I know, one of the topics I'm writing about right now is like the Nez Perce tribe, which I knew nothing about before I started writing this curriculum. But now I know a lot, but for teachers picking it up and teaching it, we have to figure out how to get them that knowledge so they feel as comfortable teaching it as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I would say, again, it is not the fault of teachers. I would feel the same way right now about
I would
a
feel
whole
so
host
scared,
of topics with first graders, And I have a first grader at home and I know that I'm like, am I telling? We need to look this up. He asked me questions. I'm like, I have no idea.
I know. How did parents parent before Google? I have no idea.
Libraries. They went to the library.
And looked in the encyclopedias.
Oh, yeah.
Encyclopedias.
Thank you. Yeah.
I know. I sometimes think that too. I'm like, how did we all grow up? I'm a little bit confused.
Yes. Well, and it is funny too, because they think that they think you have all the answers. So they ask you these big questions and you're like, I'm not quite sure. But I love, you said yesterday, language and knowledge are intertwined and take time to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think that just speaks to what you just shared so much.
Yes. I think, unfortunately, everybody really wants a quick fix. Mm-hmm. And people think like, oh, children are, they're in fourth grade. They're not doing well. Their reading comprehension, it's not going well. But if that language and that knowledge wasn't built up all along, this is probably one of the reasons why it's not going well.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's very hard to quick fix that because unlike other skills, when we think about the skills needed to decode words, and for the beginning reader, there, some people call it constrained skills. There's a finite set of alphabet letters, there's a finite way they go together and things like this. Whereas the language is like a lot more unconstrained. I'm not saying it's more important, but it is equally as important to build language and knowledge early on. That language comprehension side of the rope, of Scarborough's rope you were talking about, it's equally as important to grow that area early on. And you might not see the immediate benefit in the reading scores, their early reading scores, because you're not testing the language areas yet. You're testing the decoding areas. And then you'll really see the benefit as children move up. And then also, there's benefit of the language and vocabulary to decoding as well. Mm-hmm. So if a child doesn't have a certain word in their lexicon already, how are they going to decode it? Right?
Yeah. It's so important. And I always think about teachers, who have said things, ask, like, just in conversation, my friends who are teachers are like, well, can you share how are, like, primary teachers, how are students able to, comprehend this rich text when they can't read the words yet. And that is something that sticks with me because I think it is so fundamental to primary teachers to put one thing first and put the word recognition first and the language comprehension second. And what I would say is it's a both and. It's not it's not either or.
It's absolutely a both and.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that well, first of all, I'm so glad that your work is in the primary space because that really does help kind of debunk that thought. And again, by no fault of anyone, especially our beloved teachers.
Yep.
It's just what we were taught and what we've been ingrained to think. So I'm so glad that you're doing the work in that space because I think once you hit kind of third grade, it does kind of automatically debunk in the way that we've been taught over long periods of time, like that. I love that we're debunking like learning to read, reading to learn, like I try never to say that.
Right. And, and teachers still do say that. And, that is, that was from Jean Chall, who was amazing researcher and from Harvard University. And, I've heard a colleague describe that really well as more of a description of development and less of not a way to instruct. Mm-hmm. So she wasn't talking about instruction. And so you are always learning to, you're always reading to learn from the very beginning. And I would say that the language and knowledge piece of it, the language comprehension piece of it starts, you're at birth, you're opening, those conversations early, even before children are able to do back and forths with you. They're still, even little babies are doing back and forths with you. They're doing proto conversations. Yeah. Right. And so you're building the language repertoire right from the beginning. And I think it's really hard to parse language and knowledge because they're just so closely linked. Our experiences, the way we think about them and language. I think that they're distinct, but I think that they're just so intertwined. So we need to build them early. And I think, reading aloud is a ubiquitous practice in the early grades, right? And thinking about the read aloud as a vehicle for conversations, for building language skills in ways that matter for children, making sure that they're part of the conversation.
That's what I was thinking, that reading to learn, like it counts if someone's reading it aloud to them. Like that counts.
Yes. Absolutely.
As reading to learn.
Exactly. That's what, and, my colleagues, Gina Cervetti and Freddie Heber have a nice paper in Reading Teacher. I forgot what year it was, but I think it was about this sixth pillar of reading instruction. And they talk about knowledge and they make that point. And it is important to know that reading to learn happens even when they're unable to decode the words themselves, because when they are able to decode words, they need to be able to understand what they're reading. They also need to have some of those words in their lexicon to even decode them. And they need to understand different text structures. They need to understand all these things that we're just like, why don't you get this? Well, if they were not exposed to those things, there'd be no reason for them to get it.
Such a good point. Mic drop. All right. Is there anything else, Sonia, that you want to share about from your research or anything before we ask you? I know you're really excited for our last 5 questions.
The rapid fire question lightning round. I think I would like to say that, it is there is a lot of really promising research in the early grades about this integration between content and literacy. And I think that the place that I'm, pressing my research forward on is continuing to understand kind of the mechanisms as to why that might be the case. And I do think about the teacher, how the context or what teachers are teaching about affects the ways they model language for children. So I think it's a really important, discussion to think about, and to think about how can we integrate content and literacy instruction in ways that improve both content and literacy instruction, knowledge for kids.
This just makes me so happy. The whole topic makes me so happy.
We're just going to block your calendar off for the rest of the day and keep talking.
No problem.
Love
It's fun.
All right. Are we ready for our final 5 questions?
Yes, go for it.
All right. So our 5 things that you love. We'll start out with, what do you love to read?
Okay, I'm really into young adult literature. A lot, where there's often a love triangle featured. The Twilight series, or I'm reading one right now called Matched. Don't tell me how it ends. I haven't finished it.
I don't know that one.
I love the young adult
do you have
dystopian genre.
Like a tween?
No, I'm a tween at heart.
Okay, so same, because
it.
when you said that, I was like, I also can really connect with this. But I don't think you have, from what you said earlier. I was like,
no, I have a 7-year-old, but what really made me excited about this was in my master's program, I took a young adult literature class and I started reading it. I'm like, oh, I really like this. And so, but it's the young adult dystopian fiction. So, Divergent, Hunger Games, all those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
all right, this one's a good one. Okay. What do you love to binge watch?
Well, if those are made into movies and stuff, those are really fun to watch. But I would say my go-to series are like The Office. Love The Office.
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've watched The Office.
I know, me too. And then there's this new one that I've been binge watching, and it's been a strange binge watch for me. It's on YouTube. It's the Behavior Panel guys, and there are 4 guys who break down behavior and tell you if people are lying and the different things that they're doing. If how their face should be, where they're like, if they're having grief, it should show up in the forehead and in the chin. It's just fascinating. What they do is they watch a bunch of baseline for somebody, how they normally act, and then see how they're acting. So they do this with things that are going on right now. Like, I think today's video that's dropping is about Amber Heard.
That's good.
That's probably going to be very controversial.
No comment.
All right. What do you love to listen to?
Right now, I have Olivia Rodrigo on repeat. I'm really liking that Sour album.
You are a tween at heart.
I love me some Taylor Swift too. Yeah, I am a tween at heart. I think I'm 15 forever. Actually, that's when
I'm going to send you like a tie-dye crop top that says Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. You can just wear that all day.
That's funny. But I met my husband when I was 15 and he was 17, and we just celebrated our 24th anniversy the other day.
Congrats.
And I used to pray, please let the first boy I kiss be the man I marry. And he's the only boy I ever kissed. But he is, I'm still stuck at 15, and we always make a joke of that. Like, I am still stuck there.
I love it's a good place to be stuck, right?
Yeah.
It's past middle school.
Right. I had to make it past middle school. Oh, couldn't be stuck at middle school. Please, Lord, no.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so not middle school. You probably won't give a middle school answer for this next one. What is a memory you love as a teacher or as a student?
I really loved when I was teaching 2nd grade that you can really see kind of students light up when they were doing something that they enjoyed so much. I remember in my class, students would be, one student was so interested in writing plays. Later on, he grew up to be in the theater, but he was so interested in this. And I loved kind of, paying attention to their interests and helping them develop some of those interests. So it was exciting to me to see them doing what they loved. And I think those are the things I tend to remember about my time, and how much, I think the special thing about being a teacher is you develop those relationships with the students, and they do feel like, I cried at the end of each year, and you just love them, and you want the best for them. and they love you, and you're a celebrity everywhere you go. Like I go to their soccer game, and they're like, oh, Mrs. Cabell is here. Mrs. Cabell is here.
It is really fun to do that. Yeah, I also love it when you like when you see a student outside of school and like years later, and they're like, oh, Miss Sappington. And then they're like so excited to tell you what they've done since you've been. It's just the sweetest. Like it never gets old.
It's so sweet, and but you realize, wow, they're Facebook friends, and they're now adults. It just makes you realize how time passes. Like I'm still 15, remember? Time really, really passed.
Funny. Our last question is, why do you do what you love for literacy?
That's a good question. I think reading is one of the most important skills that we can have, and it opens the door to everything in our lives. It opens the door to spiritual things. It opens the door to learning about new things. It gives opportunities. There's just so much about reading and that matters for life. So I just always loved the idea of, helping children learn to read. And I think that was one of my driving factors when I was teaching too. Before I, specialized in reading, I just always had the belief that reading was underlied so many other things. And if you could learn how to read, you could do anything. So I loved, I still love reading. I think it's one of the best things. And when I think about reading, though, I say reading, but I also mean writing. So I think reading and writing, right? Maybe some other time we could talk about writing in a podcast.
Yes. Write it down, Lori.
Yes. Well, it has been an honor to talk with you, and we're so grateful for everything you do for students and teachers. And your research is so important, and your work is so important every day. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. And thank you for doing what you're doing and elevating different voices and, reaching so many teachers. And to all the teachers out there, thank you for all of you for what you do every day. It is an extremely hard job, and there is not enough thanks given to our teachers. And I think in the pandemic, people began to realize how much teachers do. And I really, I can't stress more how much I admire teachers and I have so much respect for teaching.
Could not agree more.
I know. We need to have Melissa and Lori Love Literacy shirts that say just like, we just love teachers.
Yes.
We are so grateful to you. Thank you for taking our children and making them better people every day.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Sonia. This was such a treat.
I appreciated being here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, literacy lovers. We release a new podcast episode every Friday and share more resources in a newsletter on Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at literacypodcast.com. Each week, you'll receive important information, resources, and connected content.
We're excited to create a space for community discussion about our podcast. We want to connect with our listeners and support you in answering your questions. But we also realize there are a lot of other educators out there who have great advice and experience too. Let's keep learning together in our Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast Facebook group, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If the content in this episode helped you, share with a fellow educator and teacher friend. Our literacy lover community welcomes educators at every stage of their learning journey. We're so glad you're here to learn with us.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast in this episode are not necessarily the opinions of Great Minds PBC or its employees.